Before we close this topic, let me continue with the previous reel about the difference psychologically and emotionally between children who have been raised as abusers, that is, who have been allowed and encouraged to ignore abuse towards someone else, and therefore taking the part of the abusers, identifying with the abusers, and children who were instead the victims of abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, or both. There was an experiment, as I've said before, done at Irvine in I believe it was the late 60s, in which students were divided into two groups. They volunteered for this experiment. One group volunteered to be prisoners, and one group volunteered to be guards, or they were selected. And the experiment had to be stopped within a period of time that was shorter than expected because the abuse on the part of the abusers became too intense. So, how were the quote unquote prisoners abused? They were deprived of their rights, they were dismissed, discounted, requests were ignored, power issues occurred between the guards and the prisoners, even though everybody was a student, and psychological and emotional abuse became more common as the prison guards realized they had more and more power. In the end, the experiment had to be terminated ahead of time. Afterwards, one of the so-called guards and one of the so-called prisoners were interviewed together in a video, which is available someplace online. And in this heartbreaking video, the abused quote prisoner tried to explain to the quote guard, to the other student, how he felt to be treated the way the guard had treated him, emotionally abusive and power wielding. But the abuser, who had not experienced being a prisoner, clearly was not able to even understand the concept of what the prisoner student was telling him. He could not relate. He had had no similar experience. He had been a guard, he had been encouraged to be abusive in whatever way was permitted, the details weren't given. And this is typical. If you come from a family in which you were scapegoated or abused physically, emotionally, or mentally, if you come from a family in which you were the only one who was discounted and your intelligence put into question and your ability to succeed in life dismissed, if you come from that kind of a family, it will be extremely rare that your siblings who were identified with the abusers will have any capacity for empathy toward you because they are in denial. You see, when you identify as a youngster with abusers, then you lose empathy for the person who is abused. I spoke once with a favored child who had a scapegoated sibling, and we were talking about the Nazis and the Jews. And there was a particular scene in a film where a Nazi guard was abusing a Jew. And the sympathy of the scapegoated and abused child was all for the Jewish person who was being persecuted, basically. But the sympathy of the sibling who identified with the abusers was all for the guard. Oh, the guard, poor thing, I wonder what he's feeling. There is an incapacity to identify with abusers, at least on the personal relationship basis. Now, a favored child might identify with charity causes and hungry people and donations, but that's not the same thing. That's an intellectual compassion, but they are incapable in general of feeling empathy for the abused person. It is an imprinting they learn that they have no intention of unlearning, because unlearning all the times they ignored abuse would create guilt, and it would put into question, as I've said before, their self-identity as deserving to be treated better than someone else.